I played such a variety, whether it was Bach or Beethoven or Chopin. I just loved the variety that I was exposed to.
There's always been a piano in my house. I've never wondered why. My mom, sister, and I can all play the piano, but why? Where did this musical gene come from? There's one person in my family I knew I could ask. My grandmother, Lucy Hastings. I know she was trained in classical piano. I know this grand piano used to belong to her, but that's all I know. So I decided to ask her more. What made you interested in learning how to play the piano?
I always wanted to learn to play because I heard my mother play, and I kept begging her for piano lessons. So that's where it really started. I was intrigued that she could move her fingers in such a wonderful way and produce this beautiful music. I mean, the connection between her hands and the piano just fascinated me as a child. I had been begging my mother for lessons for ages, it seemed like, and finally when I turned 6 years old, she came to me one day and she said, "This is the day you get your first piano lesson." And I was so excited. I remember that day very vividly. And I do remember even the book that we used. It was a little red covered book that said, "Teaching Little Fingers to Play." I had several piano teachers. My mother was the first. And then when I was maybe 9 or so, I started taking lessons from the local piano teacher whose name was Paul Tier. And of all the teachers I had, I think he was the most influential. The first concert that I can remember, I think, was my first recital when I was 12. And this was a small town, and I gave a recital in the Methodist Church, which is the church that we attended. So it was great fun.
Paul Tier got a new job and had to move away. At that point, my grandmother found a new piano teacher named Mr. Klee.
Well, when I took lessons, there was always a recital at the end of the year, usually in May. And I remember when I was with Mr. Klee, I guess it was probably my junior year, we played a 2-piano version of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. And that was just pure fun. The state of Pennsylvania sponsored a piano competition. And I was able to participate in that, and all the schools in the state of Pennsylvania were involved. And we went to Juniata College for our division, and I did come in first place there. And then for the finals, they were held at York, Pennsylvania, and I did not come in first, but I got a very high rating, and I was thrilled. It was a wonderful experience.
Grandma's experience with performing in high-pressure situations would be important when she auditioned for music programs. One college stood out in particular, the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York.
The audition for Eastman took place in one day, and the most critical thing I had to do was to play the Chopin piece, Fantasy Impromptu.
7 pages of complexity after complexity. Chopin's masterpiece can intimidate any pianist. And listening to this iconic piece makes it even more daunting.
You get so involved in concentrating on the music itself that you kind of forget that there are other people in the room.
Once she was accepted into Eastman, the challenges didn't stop.
For someone like me who grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, going to Eastman was was very illuminating because for all of a sudden I heard people in the halls at Eastman speaking a different language, which I had never experienced before. There were people from all over the world.
My grandmother had to get used to juggling multiple jobs, her schoolwork, practicing the piano, and her new teacher, who was no easier than her previous ones.
He was a very tough teacher, and most of his students were going to be concert pianists. So they were really at another level. It was pretty tough for me the first year. I really learned a lot from him. He was a wonderful teacher.
At this point, I felt like I was understanding my grandmother's past very well, but that left some questions unanswered. What about the piano?
When we were first married, we got a monetary gift as a wedding gift. And my husband was very generous, and we used that to buy a piano, which you eventually inherited. It was the upright piano. And then eventually we got a grand piano, and you eventually inherited that one too. When you first buy a piano, sometimes it will sound rather tinny, and you really have to play it for a while before it gets the mellow sound that you really want. So when you go to a piano store to buy a piano, you have to realize that it needs to be broken in, so to speak. When I first played that piano, it felt very comfortable. So that was the one that I ended up buying.
I never realized how much my grandmother had to overcome as she learned how to play the piano and as she went to college. I never knew exactly how difficult the piano pieces she played were until now. After speaking to my grandmother, I was certain of one more thing. This piano would forever be important to my family.